Alright, so this week, nothing really eventful as far as stuff that came out on DVD, at least that I hadn't already seen. So obviously our main focus this week is going to be the fact that Aronofsky's put another movie out, and plus two more that don't really matter that much. So let's go into this week's main focus, which is Mother, lowercase m, exclamation point. Even the ticket says that. I was kind of surprised they went the distance with that, because usually they don't. So, well, first off, I guess, before I say anything, I don't plan on, like, outright spoiling anything, like, exactly what happens, but in order to go in, all the different meanings that Aronofsky has put into this, or what we can guess are some of the meanings that Aronofsky put into this, we are going to have to... That might be considered spoiler territory for a lot of people, so I'll just kind of say that this is like a spoilery thing so that you can stop now if you haven't seen it or plan on seeing it. And you like want to go in completely blind, because we're going to go into all that stuff, or at least I will do my best to. So... And also, before we go in, I should probably mention how I feel about Aronofsky as a whole, because that's going to be really important in regards to your enjoyment level of this. Starting with Pi, I'm not crazy about it, but I get it, I guess you could say. I own it, so I kind of respect it for what it is, but it's not a movie particularly I jump to as far as something particularly great. Requiem for a Dream I have reviewed here before, which I like a lot. The Fountain I haven't seen since the theater 11 years ago, and I really didn't think much of it, but ever since it came out I have run into numerous people who I respect that consider it like a favorite movie of all time, so eventually I'll seek it out again and see what I probably missed back when I was 15 or 16 when it came out, because I'm sure I missed a lot. Then there's The Wrestler, which I absolutely adore, and Mickey Rourke not beating Sean Penn is still a little painful when I think back to it. And it's just such a beautiful, tragic movie, and very great with characters as well. Black Swan, once again I reviewed it, so you'll know if you saw that I liked Black Swan the first couple of times I saw it, but then I've seen it twice more since then, and I just don't think a lot of it. You can track that video down if you want. And then Noah I talked about when it came out. I really don't remember much about it. I really didn't care for it. I thought it was like really big and really messy, and really didn't seem to quite know what it wanted to be, or what it wanted to do, or what it wanted to say. So he kind of keeps up with that biblical theme going into this one. And obviously it starts off, and it seems to have been advertised mostly as like kind of somewhat a home invasion thing, a little bit, where we have this perfect house in this perfect area with this perfect married couple that are Javier Bardem and Jennifer Lawrence, and then Ed Harris shows up at their door, and then Michelle Pfeiffer shows up at their door, and then all hell breaks loose. And then there are a lot of things in this movie to note. First off, technically is probably where you want to look first, and one of the first things that will immediately stand out is that there's no score, which apparently is, when you have Javier Bardem in your movie, that can't happen. And apparently there's no score at all, but like similar to No Country for Old Men, I kind of felt like there had to have been scenes where there was something there, but that's the thing also, is the sound design is really interesting to pay attention to with this. And it basically, like, you can sense that there's no score, but at the same time, it's not something you may particularly notice right away, because this movie is rarely quiet, despite having no score and despite having such a limited setting, because the sound is so apparent, and it obviously will eventually get louder and louder as it goes. And there's moments in there where it almost sounds like it could be a score, but it could also be anything in the house. This house is like really noisy and creaky constantly. The house is basically, not quite in a House on Haunted Hill style, but the house is basically alive. And also, something they do here is, like, the way, obviously, like, I kept feeling like there were other things in the theater. It was, in the really quiet moments, you could blatantly hear it in the next theater. So there was that, like, specifically the leper scene. Like, you could hear, like, the whole thing, while a quiet scene here where she's, like, setting up dinner played out. But then there's also stuff like how you feel that, and then there's also, there's a moment when there's like a whole big group of people, but the thing is this is such a limited setting, as we were saying. It really, I don't recall the camera going outside the house much at all. And so when we're in this limited setting and there's a lot of people in there, it kind of sounds like, even though there can't possibly be this many people because the house is only so big, the sound on the soundtrack is kind of like the sound like when you walk into a very crowded room, almost like, imagine like a crowded gym or a crowded cafeteria or something. It sounds like that, which I found really interesting. And another thing is the idea of when it's set. It reminded me very much of Stoker in this sense, to where it appears to be like an old-timey setting, but then there's always like something in there that kind of throws that off, kind of like the scene in Stoker when you're kind of under the impression this could be like the early 1900s or even the 1800s, and then suddenly Nicole Kidman's listening to an iPod, and it's there's a scene very similar like that. And also, as far as the way they use close-ups, particularly in Lawrence's case, because when you want to talk about the movie's point of view, the really interesting thing that it does here is how much it puts us in kind of Lawrence's perspective of this stuff, and how we're basically, even though it's her house and she's like the central character, it's almost like she just feels like a spectator to everything that's going to happen and does happen. And so it's almost kind of like we're seeing, and we kind of have the same reactions, Jesus Christ, reactions that she does. And the thing here is, like, the way she witnesses things that just kind of seem like they don't make sense. Like, in one scene, Ed Harris is sick and appears to be dying, and then the very next morning, he says he feels fine, and it's like that never happened, and she's the only one that seems clueless to why this would be. It's sort of like in dreams, how things kind of make sense in your head. It's only when you wake up you realize something was off. I didn't want to quite quote DiCaprio in Inception there, but and we basically see that where it's like there's no real perception of time. Kind of like when Bardem finally gets like this stroke of inspiration and he writes this whole thing, and then he says, "I just wrote this, what do you think?" And then she tells him, and then like seconds later he's like talking to a publisher and it's already been done. And it just kind of has this continuous thing going on, but there's clear passages of time that aren't here, yet we get to those points without those breaks, and it just feels this really weird thing that this movie pulls off really well. Like, this is one of those things where it could have just been, I imagine this movie's going to be frustrating to a lot of people, and I totally get that. There's no, like, I'm not going to be one of those people that says, oh, if you don't get it, then you're not smart enough to get it or whatever. No, I completely get where somebody that might hate this movie is coming from, given the approach. Obviously, like I said, though, if you're familiar with Aronofsky, you should have a good idea. Even though I can't necessarily say he's done something quite like this. It's weird. He kind of has that really dark horror vibe, kind of like he put on Black Swan. But if this is anything like another movie he's done, it would be The Fountain, just because of the whole approach. Because the thing here is they do a lot of it's really hard how to go into this without saying exactly what happens, but actually, before I go into that, I want to back up and continue what I was going to say, because I totally lost it. Another thing about seeing it from Lawrence's perspective is you'll notice that she's shot a little differently than everything else, and like a lot of close-ups with her, where there's a particular moment when like right at the very beginning when she's talking to Bardem, and her face is pretty much a close-up. But when we cut to him, he's not in close-up, he's pretty much at a normal distance. But every time we cut back to her, in this back and forth with him, it's like we never get closer to him, there's no close-up of him, but we're getting closer and closer to her with each cut. And stuff like that, and how it kind of feels like it makes us closer to her, because like I said, she's joining us as a spectator, and kind of reacting in the same way as to what's happening. And there's also stuff, the way, I'm not quite sure what his angle would have been here, or if it was just the way it was shot, and there's really nothing of note about it. But I couldn't help but notice there was a lot of, like, almost like the demi-shots, particularly from Silence of the Lambs, when people are talking directly to the camera. There are a lot of shots that feel like they're doing that, except they're not quite, like, the camera's facing them head-on, but their eyes are just ever so slightly not quite in the camera. And there's a lot of shots that feel like that, to where it's like, we're, like, really close to fourth wall breaking, but we never quite get there, but we're really close to it. Almost kind of feeling like what now we can go into this. We've come back to where I was going to go. The whole idea that it's all an allegory, here's the thing. I think it might possibly move a little too fast in regards to that, because, like, I think it would benefit from a little more build-up, kind of like how, so from what I hear, the marketing is setting up that it's basically like a home invasion movie or something. But obviously, the whole movie kind of starts at what it's going to be, pretty much from beginning to end. So there's never quite that moment where you think the movie's going to be one thing and then it ends up being another, because we pretty much start right off with the symbolism. Like, there's no, like, it's not like there's, you know, some long scenes where we're just seeing Lawrence and Bardem as a married couple. We can buy them as real people, and then after enough build-up, Ed Harris shows up, and then he seems normal, and then Pfeiffer seems normal, and then we go into crazy shit. No, it's pretty much right off the bat, just the allegory from beginning to end constantly. There's no kind of descent into, let's play it up like one thing, and then we slowly devolve until we realize that we're this thing. I think it would have benefited more from a build-up like that, and because everything else kind of feels... This is a movie where you can't really... obviously, people are going crazy nowadays talking about how, like, it's really... obviously, it used to be a thing. It used to be kind of a fun thing to watch, like, a horror movie, and you could point out the stupid things that the characters are doing, and it's like, oh, no, they shouldn't do that. And now people get so incredibly angry when characters do that. It's not just part of the fun horror experience and all that now. People say a movie is absolute shit because of the decisions that characters make now. As if they haven't been doing that since the beginning of movie history. And here, I'm sure there will be people that take this movie on a surface level and see it as that, and there'll be plenty of moments in this movie where people are saying, why is this character doing this, and why can't this character do that, and all that. But the thing here is that because it's pretty much that whole thing from beginning to end, you never really... For me, anyway, if you realize that, you don't really feel that, because that's... Obviously, with this setting, it's just everything is moving on its own. They're hardly... Like, it's really hard when you take the allegory as big as you can to even call them characters. They just feel like loose representations, and that's the problem with kind of catching what this movie's doing a little too early. Because then it entirely feels like the allegory. It does not feel like any kind of character movie, or a horror movie, or a thriller, or anything like that. All you see is the symbolism. And that's kind of, once you get it, then you kind of see what direction it's going to go, and then that's pretty much it. It's just a matter of how much you appreciate what it's doing when it does that, in regards to how you're going to feel about when it goes on. And I don't know. I do like this movie, but it's definitely more from a technical standpoint, and just the way Aronofsky so confidently expresses himself that's appealing to me, as opposed to pretty much anything else. And the idea here where, and I understand, the thing about this was I watched some stuff with Aronofsky talking about this movie, and a little bit with Lawrence also. And for me, it's really hard to say, because people will watch this movie and they'll think Aronofsky is like totally and completely full of himself. You can also probably get that from watching Black Swan or The Fountain, if you just want to look at it from that stance without really trying too much to go in it. Or you could totally get his points but still say, wow, that's really pretentious, and wow, that's really arrogant. But there's something about watching Aronofsky talk about his ideas and how excited he gets about the kind of his ideas and how to get them to the screen and how much that amps him up. It's like I can't really see it that way, but I totally understand where somebody might be coming from. I do think it's a little tiny bit narrow-minded, but but I do understand. It makes it a lot easier to enjoy it when you really know where the director's coming from and how ecstatic he is about these ideas he wants to get out there. And this is a movie where obviously you can take it in so many ways, is kind of the appealing thing about it, but it's clearly this whole biblical thing, but then there's also, you can, like, I remember a while back reading it was supposed to be about the creative process and fame, and that's still in there too, like, and they're kind of doing it simultaneously, like, it's not all over the place, like, sometimes it's doing a biblical thing, sometimes an environmental thing, sometimes the celebrity, creativity, fame thing. It's kind of all doing it at the same time, but that's the really impressive thing. That it's doing all this at once without changing its direction, because you can just take it as, it's just one whole product that you can take as either this or this or this or all three. And it doesn't have to, do one thing like one at a time. And that's where a lot of directors fail, because they have so much they want to say, and they try to cram it all in one movie, saying it in different directions. Aronofsky's found this story and this way to present it, to where you can just take whichever one and you don't have to go off the path. You can accept it as one or more than one, and that's good, but at the same time, still, it's just kind of like, once you grab a hold of it so early, there's not a whole lot left, because by the time we get to the last half hour or so, it becomes very clear this will surprise a lot of people. Just how big and where exactly this movie goes. But even once it gets to that point, you could acknowledge where it's like, this got really huge, really fast, but at the same time we saw the progression we got there, and we saw this happen, and we saw how it got to this point, which is great, but it's kind of like, there's kind of a lack of surprise, because we kind of knew where this was going. From whichever point you want to take, whichever representation of it you want to take, you still know which direction pretty much going. If you take the fame and creative process approach, you might not be ready for the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, but I mean, if you've got like the environmental message or the whole biblical allegory, then you pretty much know where we're headed. And especially, I don't know, I don't know if it's the very first scene when we see it all happen, which is obviously going to repeat, if that's what made it so easy to figure out early, or what, but I do kind of like the whole full circle approach, because obviously that's a whole thing, and that's the thing too, is it's very clear Aronofsky has a lot of passion in what he's saying with this, and he really, really wants to get it out there. Like, obviously a big criticism of the movie, I guarantee, will be there's no subtlety. But that's the thing, is Aronofsky is so passionate about what he wants to say here, I don't think he wants to be subtle. I don't think that's the idea. So it's like, it's kind of hard to fault a movie for not being subtle when the whole idea is that Aronofsky wants to scream at the world, this is what's on his mind. But that's the thing that he does well that I don't mind about it, because you could say it's preachy or whatever. But I like the way he does it, because when I think preachy, I think more like the example I often use is when Bobcat Goldthwait made God Bless America. But there's a ton of movies like that where the writer and or director has something they really, really want to say, but they kind of just beat you over the head with their words to say that. and they just kind of like have characters ranting and all that, and they pretty much spell everything out. I really like that Aronofsky has something he so passionately wants to get out like that, or multiple things. And he doesn't do it with words, he does it with this. Because there's hardly anything in here, words-wise, that really... I mean, obviously Lawrence's dialogue towards the very end starts to pretty much spell everything out. But I mean, that this is the way he expresses himself and really gets those ideas out there in such a unique way, is where a lot of the appeal lies. And I know I stressed the word unique, but I know he's gotten, even with just the advertising, he's gotten a lot of flack for being derivative, mostly of Polanski stuff. Like, obviously the promotion seems to kind of be echoing Rosemary's Baby, like the posters. And obviously, eventually, the plot. But then there's also stuff like the stuff at the beginning when Lawrence is just kind of hearing the house and she feels like I guess the house has a heartbeat or something. It feels very much like Repulsion, a lot, but it still more or less feels like its own thing, despite the fact that it's got a lot of, you know, Polanski influence and stuff. But still, just the idea of a director using this to express what's really in his heart. And doing it in a way that feels less preachy and more artful. You really sense that you're seeing somebody really express themselves through their art, which is something that typically, like I said, you hear that and you just think that just sounds so... it's hard to say without, you know, making people think that just sounds like somebody that's way up their own ass. But I don't know, and I'll be honest, I've felt that way about Aronofsky before, but here... I think it more or less rings true. I do think it starts to... I mean, it is very on the nose, which is kind of probably its biggest downfall, but still, just the way it... Just watching a person express themselves through this crazy imagery and have it all... I mean, it could be worse. He could be just throwing random shit in there. Not in a Lynch way, because Lynch has his own style that comes from his own personal place, even if it doesn't link together and make sense. You feel like it's coming from a personal place with Lynch, and there are directors out there, most of which have probably fallen off the face of the earth for good reason, that will just throw random shit out there with no connection whatsoever and say, you figure it out, I'm artsy. And it's like, this doesn't feel like that, but I understand if somebody could see it in that way. But, like I said, though, it could be... Another problem is it might be too obvious. So, I do think if it was... It's really hard to say what else you would do, because this is clearly such a... kind of a personal project coming from him, but... Yeah, it's... There are some things... Like, if this is exactly what I was going to do, obviously I would have done stuff like... Have more build-up and maybe... Like I said, maybe not necessarily make it more subtle, because that's clearly not the point. But just in a way that's not so easy to figure out at first. Like, the great thing about these movies is kind of slowly getting to piece it together as it goes, but it's like, if you figure it out in like half an hour, and you got an hour and a half of the movie to go, it's really not going to hit as hard when we get to those big moments, and it really starts to fall into place that this is what that is. So, yeah, there is, I think that's more or less all I wanted to say, but there is, I know that there is, there's been a lot of backlash with Lawrence, for a while now, going with, that's just what happens, it's popularity, and then it's not so much, but she still clearly has a fan base here, and there will be, people are much more dismissive of her now than they were in, say, 2012. And so, obviously, people are going to write it off like, oh, there's so many people now saying, oh, she's so average, she's so overrated. I don't think she's, the greatest thing ever, but I do think she still brings consistently good performances. Even Joy was what it was, but she's still very good in it. And I do like what she's doing here, where she's very much has to... Because the thing about these people, when they keep coming to the house, is how relentlessly polite they are, but so incredibly intrusive. And it's like, it kind of brings out that thing in normal people, at least people who aren't, people who aren't very confrontational, if somebody is polite to you, it's like they can pretty much do what they want and you have trouble kind of trying to put them in their place if they're getting out of hand. To where it's like they can be doing the worst thing ever, but as long as they're like polite to you, it's like, oh god, I can't be confrontational. And she really brings that out really well. And now it just gets worse and worse, and it's like she's just kind of getting walked all over. And we kind of see that boiling point slowly kind of coming, but she's still very passive about the whole thing, until she starts to really blow up. And it's really interesting to watch her do this, and I think she really pulled it off. And of course, Bardem's kind of the perfect casting choice here. I know people were like, everybody's all up in arms about the fact that Bardem is much older than her, and then it's like, well, number one, Ed Harris brings that up and says, you know, like, I thought she was your daughter. But then there's the whole idea of when you see what the whole big picture of the thing is, it's like, it kind of makes sense that his character has been around longer than her. It actually makes perfect sense. So that's not a point of worry at all. I do think, I like what Ed Harris is doing here, where it's kind of like, he's also one of those people where he's so intrusive, but you're so afraid of offending him if you tell him to fuck off. Because he seems like easily wounded. And then Pfeiffer, I like what Pfeiffer's doing. I don't think she's here long enough. Like, I put her in my Oscar predictions last time we did this. I don't know that she has enough time to be able to pull that off, but and just the fact that this is a crazy-ass movie, and it'll be really hard to see if they take to it. But, so, yeah, I do like the pieces of it, and I do like the whole idea, but it does suffer from kind of being obvious a little too early, and sometimes way too on the nose, but still, it's really admirable to watch a director under a big studio's name like Paramount being able to just really express himself in this way that's just so incredibly fucked up, but still makes perfect sense when you look at the whole thing. So, yeah, that's how I feel about that. I have no idea. It really depends on the person of who's going to take to this and who isn't. Even Aronofsky fans, I'm really not quite sure. So, like I said, the thing I'd probably compare it to the most would be The Fountain, because it kind of feels like they take the same approach, but obviously telling different stories. So, yeah. Oh, I also didn't mention the Gleason brothers who show up, who are also... Donald Gleason in any movie is also nice, but it's also... That's kind of another thing where once they come into the story and what happens, it's kind of like, yep, this is exactly what I think it is. But I still like the way they kind of started off the chaotic thing, and then it pretty much just quickly goes off the rails there. And like I said, the way it goes as off the rails as it does, but we see it get from one point to the other, that's what makes it feel like it's not so outlandish. So, yeah. I mean, it could be... It's probably going to be angry. Not just the fact that like mainstream audiences will see some artsy movie that's supposed to be a home invasion movie and get pissed off. It's also like, considering people will be able to figure this out, which like I said, it's pretty easy to do, there might be some controversy to be had about a big studio movie that basically says, more or less, this is a big mainstream Paramount movie where the human race is the villain. I don't know how people are going to feel about that, but we will see. We will definitely see. We will definitely be hearing about that over the weekend, I'm sure. Alright, let's go on to our second movie, which I didn't know existed a couple weeks ago. It's called Dead Again in Tombstone. I don't know how many people know this, but this is actually a sequel to a movie called Dead in Tombstone, which I didn't know existed until I very conveniently picked it up at the library about a month and a half ago, having no idea this was going to exist. And in that movie, if you did not catch it, which, if for some reason you want to see Dead in Tombstone, I'm basically about to spoil it right now, but given the kind of movie that it is, that probably doesn't matter. It's basically The Crow in a Western setting starring Danny Trejo. To where it's more like Jonah Hex than anything else. I know that doesn't sound promising. Dead in Tombstone is better than Jonah Hex, I promise. Not this one, but the first one is. So... And he is killed by his half-brother, who is Anthony Michael Hall. And Anthony Michael Hall becomes the big villain, and he takes over, and Lucifer is played by Mickey Rourke. And he decides that he's going to let Danny Trejo rise from the dead and kill all the people, kill his old gang that killed him, and send him to hell. And then he'll basically get to be immortal or something. When the movie ends, he kills Anthony Michael Hall, but he's like 4 minutes too late. So Lucifer says, well, I can't grant you what I was going to grant you, but you can repay me by, you can live on Earth again, but you have to kill people for me. And he's like, alright, I'll be the devil's bounty hunter. End movie. So you think, okay, they made a sequel to that, where Danny Trejo is going to play Lucifer's bounty hunter. Lucifer is Mickey Rourke. Let's do this. Well, then we're immediately let down. First off, Mickey Rourke's not in this movie. I don't think we ever actually saw Lucifer. But it opens and this guy comes into town and he's wounded. And we get the exact opening of Desperado. Remember the beginning scene of Desperado when Buscemi came in and he told the whole story about what he'd seen Banderas do, and it's like, it's that exact scene, only he's recapping the first movie. Instead of saying, oh, you'll never believe what this guy's doing now. It's like, nope, we're just going to recap the first movie in this scene instead of building up his character even more, because that would totally not have been cooler. And then we have a new villain here. And so it's like, okay, so this is going to be him, like, you know, being the devil's bounty hunter. He's going to go off and, you know, kill a bunch of dudes, and we're going to see him go on these different jobs and see all these really cool bad guys come out of the woodwork, and it's like, well, we get a bad guy. One bad guy. He's got a crew, but one bad guy. This bad guy is Jake Busey. I know. So, hey, the Buseys can be a very talented bunch. It's just that they're known for being in shitty movies and being really over the top. But even so, they can make it work. I really like Jake Busey in, like, Identity, where he gets to play these really, you know, salivating psycho characters. He's in Starship Troopers, of course. And here, he just kind of gets to do the Western bad guy thing, kind of. Like, when he first came on screen, and he started talking, and he was, you know, doing his thing, it's kind of like, I can actually see this guy, like that beginning scene that, in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, when all the guys around and they're, like, reading the newspaper and all that. And it's like, I could kind of see him in a scene like that, so it's like, okay. But then he has to do his snarling Western bad guy thing, and then it's like, well, you know what? I don't think this is going to work after all. And so it turns out you can do all this different stuff when you've got this character whose job it is now to hunt people for Lucifer. And so it's like, what kind of stuff are we going to introduce? Well, they pretty much make it mostly about him and, like, make it personal, like, within the confines of that, where it's like, he has to find a box with, like, sacred family shit in it. And he has to deal with his old mother and his rebel daughter that doesn't like him and doesn't consider him family. And it's like, I can just... The hope and potential that's up here, and just with every new scene, it's going down and down. I think I already heard the explosion like 5 minutes ago. Oh god, and this is just like the intro. This is just the first 15 minutes. It's like Dead in Tombstone is not a great movie, but for the kind of thing it was, like, it's exactly what you think it is, and that's what kind of makes it cool and makes it fun, and it's like, that is just not here anymore. They take, like, all the stuff that makes shitty straight-to-video movies shitty and straight-to-video, and it just keeps piling it on. This is, like, Dead in Tombstone, I probably could have bought as, like, a limited release. Like, I could see Dead in Tombstone maybe on a few theater screens, even though it was straight-to-video. Dead Again in Tombstone is straight-to-video from beginning to end. This is, like, the definition of straight-to-video. The only thing this movie is missing is fucking Steven Seagal. So, I mean, close, he was in Machete after all, so almost. So, yeah, this is basically if those Machete movies were straight-to-video, which they probably should have been anyway. Sorry, Rodriguez, but it's true. And obviously the daughter is going to be the tough girl, the one where it's like she can throw guys around, but it's like, oh, but she's a girl, that's shocking, and oh, it's so unexpected that she's badass and all that, and it's like, that's, number one, that just doesn't work when you play it up that much, and secondly, this actress cannot pull it off at all. And it's like, that's really where the key to that character lies, where it's like, is it just that stupid cliche, or is this character legitimately awesome? And this actress is not going to try to cross that barrier. We're going to stay right here in straight-to-video land and never come out. And they try to dress it up a little bit. They try to make it look like it's well shot, but it's not really well shot. There's like one shot in a bar where it's like everything's dark and like the sun's coming in, and it's like, this is kind of cool looking. And then just as you register, it's like, okay, that's a decent shot. Every fucking shot looks like that. And it's like every shot. They try it as much as they possibly can. They thought they accomplished one thing, and they're like, okay, let's just keep doing that forever. So it's like, this is where this movie lies. It's like, I really don't think they had enough creativity, as much creativity as they thought they did when they went into this. And then by the time they were in production, they realized it was too late to back down. So they just kept going. That's what this movie feels like. And then I was just talking about, I've been talking a lot lately, what was it, Atomic Blonde, and then The Assignment, where it's like, we're really playing up now in action movies again, like it's the fucking 70s or 80s or something, and it's like, lesbians are awesome, man. And it's like, not that it's not a fantastic sight, okay? But when you're talking about inside a movie that's more or less trying to be taken seriously, you could say this plays it up like a campy thing, kind of like the first one did. I don't know, this one seems like it's trying to be a little more, like, you can tell with the way they introduce his mom, who's just the old woman, and the daughter, and it's like, they think they're doing character development. That's what they think they're doing. So you can tell they're like, weirdly enough, this is them trying a little bit. And it's failing miserably, and I guess you could commend that, but it fails so miserably, not really. And so that really comes into play to where it's like, one minute it's like, oh, we're trying to character development, oh, he's got a daughter he's got to win over, oh, he's got to take care of his old mom, even though she's a gunslinger herself. But then we have this scene with Jake Busey in a brothel. And just for no fucking reason at all, he watches two women make out in a bathtub for a long time. And then he joins them, and just as he joins them, it dissolves. And we're like, oh, I kind of thought that was going somewhere. It's like, is he going to kill them? Is this woman going to do something crucial? They kind of built her up. No, lesbians making out in a bathtub. That's the whole purpose of that scene. And now it's over, and that moment of our lives has been mostly wasted. So, this is what this movie has to offer. So, and it's like in slow-mo, I can't remember if there was porny music or not, but there might as well have been. It was like the only thing missing. And it has, not that this matters in a movie like this anymore when you get this far into it, but it's kind of like, this is also one of those movies with the very straight-to-video dialogue, where it's like, part of you wants to think it might be intentionally bad, intentionally cheesy, but that's too easy. That's too fucking lazy. So you listen to this stuff, and you actually imagine a dude that's like really proudly typing this out, thinking he's a super badass, making some super badass movie, which is not the case, obviously. And this obviously is not going to be in any way helped by the actors delivering it. And you can tell this is going to be a problem because when a movie begins and the only names you recognize are Danny Trejo and Jake Busey, I guess you should know what you've gotten yourself into. I guess maybe that's on me, but still, there could have been a fun movie in this because we saw them do it with the first movie. Like I said, it doesn't have to be great. The dialogue doesn't have to be flawless, obviously. But, make it something worth watching, something that grabs your attention and is at least, something you can really get up and see have fun watching Trejo kill the bad guys and all that stuff. And this movie doesn't offer that at all. People die in this movie, sure, but it's like, who gives a fuck? Nobody does. A crucial character dies. Oh, who do you think it is? Could it have possibly been the fucking 90,000-year-old woman gunslinging? I'll try to be sad, but I don't think it's gonna work. We have little side characters who are like allies who die, and then it's like, no, not feeling a damn thing. like, I had this joy about me watching him fight Anthony Michael Hall in the first movie and take him out in the brutal fashion that he does. And it's like, here it's just like, I kind of really want the movie to end before it's just getting to its climax. And as far as this climax, you can tell when it's kind of trying to go all big. But it's like, first off, how big can you get when a lot of the movie centers around a magic horn? And it's like, I know this movie is about a dude that comes back from the dead, the devil sends him on missions to kill people and all that, and it's like, what point is it dumb? Like, what has to happen in this movie to be considered dumb when that's your setup? Well, when they try to bring in, like I said, magic horns, and then they try to do zombies, and they try to do this whole big thing, and it's like, it just kind of keeps getting dumber to the point that it has, like I said, with a plot like this, it has to really, really be unacceptable for it to reach the complete stupidity that it does, and it does get there. And it's like, this really, and I think I said this about something else recently, but I can't remember what it was, but it's like, obviously you would typically praise a movie that's trying to build up characters and say, well, this is this character's motivation, this is where it's coming from, and this is them bonding, or whatever that shit, but it's like, it doesn't help that they're doing it so poorly, but at the same time, when you see it done, maybe if it had been done better, I wouldn't be saying this, but because it's done as poorly as it is, I'm saying, this movie really should have just been Danny Trejo fucking shit up. And that's it. We don't need his little fucking daughter. We don't need his fucking mom. We don't need any of that shit. We don't need one bad guy with one motive, with one MacGuffin. You make him be the fucking devil's bounty hunter. You bring out all these different dudes. You get creative with these, like, maybe, like, if you want to do that, do, like, backstories for these really vicious bad guys that he has to take on. Do something, but it's like a magic box with a magic horn, and lightning, and zombies. This is ridiculous. This is... and it's like, this is so fucking straight to video. I know, I know you have to know what you're in for when you watch a movie like this and know that it's straight to video, but Jesus, I was not expecting how fucking straight to video this is. Especially, like I said, the first one was straight to video, and it's completely passable, it's fine. But God, this is a piece of shit. This really... There is such potential when you talk about doing another one of these, and they didn't want to reach any of it. Nothing at all. So, that's a bummer. I don't know. I honestly don't know what I expected, really. But it's... but that's what it ended up being. So, there we go. Alright, our last movie is going to be an animated movie called Spark, A Space Tale. That's T-A-I-L. Do you remember Space Chimps from 2008? It's that. That's what this movie is. But the thing here is, obviously, our story here is we have a monkey named Spark and his two guardians, I guess, who are a fox and a pig. The fox is voiced by Jessica Biel. Exciting. And we get a whole bunch of puns. Their planet was called Bana, which of course is 2 letters away from, yes. And then there is his robotic nanny, voiced by Susan Sarandon. I don't know why. Her name is Banani. And then he has a little ship that he goes out on and does this little mission that's meant for Jessica Biel's fox. He calls it Banana Star. You may think this is endless. It does feel like it. But our plot here is that on Bana, their planet, it was blown up by a bad guy whose name is Zong or something like that. These are characters that are basically missing from Home. Remember Home, the Alien movie from a couple years ago? It's like the characters escaped from the deleted scenes of that. Anyway, their planet blew up, and it blew up into pieces. They're just floating around in space. And there's one small one over here that is used as a garbage dump. And this is where Spark and his buddies live, because Zong, or whatever his name is, doesn't know that there were survivors, I guess. So, And then we have our queen, who's voiced by Hilary Swank. I don't know how 2 Oscar winners ended up voicing characters in this, but one of which is a fucking robot that has a warm milk dispenser. I don't know, but anyway, so and then of course they send a mission to Jessica Biel's Fox, and she's supposed to take it and do her whole thing, but Spark gets it instead, and he's like, well, I'm gonna go be the hero I'm supposed to be. I don't know where he got this idea, but apparently he's supposed to be a hero. So he goes off and he does this, and it becomes something to where if you accidentally leave Nickelodeon on in the middle of the day, you might find something that looks exactly like this. So, as far as the animation goes, it is very bright, but, like, it's not like eyes bleeding like Space Chimps was, but it's bright, but it's very uninteresting. This is another one I got from the library, and the funny thing about it is, when I'm sifting through them, I'm kind of happy, because usually I can identify it by a cover very quickly, so I can just sift through them quickly. And I've seen most of them, which is a problem. Becoming a problem. And I always set Spark aside, because at a quick glance at the cover, I kept thinking it was Ratchet and Clank. Which, obviously, I saw in theaters last year, I think. And so finally I realized that it was not Ratchet and Clank. But it does kind of look like it and kind of feel like it. I do think that movie got a little bit of a bad rap. It was kind of amusing, which you can't say about this. I think it was supposed to be in 3D or was in 3D at some point because there's a lot of shit coming at the camera. But the thing is that there's really... The biggest problem with this movie is usually movies like this are harmless. I think that's the way I described Ratchet and Clank among many other things, where it's like, I don't really feel like it's bad. There's just nothing totally interesting about it. Like, if anything, it's kind of boring, but looks okay aesthetically. But here, it's like, there's like a very visible lack of creativity. Starting with, eventually it just kind of turns into Starship Troopers, where it's like they're fighting bugs, and that's about it. But then you get, like, there's the Kraken everybody wants to get to, because it's going to be the whole, like, whoever has control of it is going to be the real deal here. So, the villain has a thing that Spark steals that can locate the Kraken. And it's like, okay, writers, what big sci-fi name did you want to give this? Like, what creative thing did you come up with for this? And it's like, this thing is literally called... And this isn't like some kind of parody thing. It isn't like, oh, you expect it's going to be this, but it's just this. But it's like, no, I think it's just a severe lack of creativity. This thing is literally called the Kraken Finder. And they just call it that with totally straight faces every time. And there's stuff where it's like, there's I guess what's supposed to be considered a highlight here are scenes like Banani saying, "Let's kick some asteroid." I think these are supposedly the movie's high points. And there's really nothing to offer here. And then there's stuff like, stuff that hardly makes sense. I mean, it does, but I mean, from a character's perspective and the way he should be reacting to these things, because he's supposed to be the big hero now, he goes and he meets the Queen, and then she's like, she starts rattling off the names of his people, and it's kind of like, he doesn't even question. It does have a purpose, but it's like, this guy does not even remotely question how the Queen... He can't believe it's the Queen when he meets her. He practically shits himself. But then it's like, she's talking about the people that he knows and how important they are to the mission or whatever, and it's like, he doesn't even question this. It's like, he doesn't even ask the question. It's like, wow, you know my friends? You're the fucking Queen, and we live in the dump. And it's like, he doesn't question this. He just goes right along with it. And there's a lot of that. And it's really not very funny. It's really not. Like, like I said, with Ratchet and Clank, I remember a few funny things about it, at least. But here, the only thing is that later on we meet a character that's voiced by Patrick Stewart, who is amusing, and that's the extent of it. He has a few funny lines here and there. And then we go on, and eventually we're going to get to that point, the very obvious point, to when he turns into a hero. But that's the thing, is we talk about just how completely lackluster and unmotivated this movie is. It's like the big transformation into a hero he becomes, like with the character standing back going, whoa, it's like, holy shit, here he comes, he's transforming into the warrior hero he is to become. That's even like the tagline, it's like, become the hero that you were meant to be or something. And he's fucking twirling a stick. He's got a stick and he like twirls it. He poses, and all the characters are like, holy shit, he has become the hero. Like, and that's the thing too, is that this thing is so slow moving and so like not branching off into anything in particular whatsoever. It's like when he like twirls the stick and he becomes the hero, and it's like, oh well, this is the big climax. I look at the fucking DoD player; it's been on for 56 minutes. There's like over half an hour left. And then it is just the space battleship. It becomes Battle for Terra. Remember that boring sack of shit? Yeah. That's what it is. And so that's the thing, is that usually with this type of movie, I would just sit back and say, well, it's totally harmless. And it is. Like, it's not a bad movie. But at the same time, it's like, when I say that, I don't want to seem like I'm just encouraging a complete lack of creativity and complete and total safe mode. It's like, it just becomes, I don't seem like I want to be encouraging meaninglessness, because that's exactly what this movie is. Like I said, I can't just say it's bad, but it's like, really, I imagine there has to be so much other things you could have done with this. That's the joy of animation. It's like, you can literally do anything. You are not within limits with animation, and it's like, these are sometimes the kind of movies we get. Obviously, there are people who take animation to the farthest extent that they can. Obviously, we just had, like, Kubo and the Two Strings and stuff last year. Anything fucking Lego does. And Pixar, I guess. But, and you see movies like this, and it's just like, why does this even exist? And it's like, what were Susan Sarandon, Hilary Swank, and Patrick Stewart not doing that they had time for this? I mean, yeah, they pretty much just had to go in a recording booth for maybe, 3 days. But it's like, there's just, what's really the point with movies like this? To be, for children to see maybe once and kind of be occupied and then just never see it again because it does nothing for them, it doesn't matter. It's like, obviously not to this extent, but it's, I'm having flashbacks of that last Smurfs movie. It's like, but really, what is the point of this? When there are so many other people so many more animators and writers out there making bigger and more creative things with the beautiful art that is animation. Just this bringing imaginations to life. And it's like, and we get Spark, a Space Tale, T-A-I-L. I don't know. So that's what that was, and that's it. Next week is Kingsman, and like The Big Sick, Captain Underpants, come out on DVD, so that'll be exciting. Captain Underpants is probably gonna look really like great compared to just the total lack of creativity that is here. Or I may totally retract that. We'll see, but and we'll see what the big deal with The Big Sick is. So, yeah, I think that's about it, and the Versus is already out. Next week we're going to deal with, Aliens, and then we'll go into my, horror thing for the next month, so, yeah, that's